Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Punaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavid Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are reading from the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, and it's the chapter called Sri Ramakrishna and His Mission. We're about halfway through it, and we're happy that our reader Atma is back, and he's going to begin just a sentence or two before we left off last week.
For the first few months, Ramakrishna forgot all about himself. He was filled with his Divine Mother. When he sat down to meditate upon her, space and time were completely overlooked, and he used to lose himself in the Divine Mother. His brother got frightened at all this and thought he might run mad if he went on like this. So he sent him home to be married after finding a suitable bride for him. He was duly married to a girl of 5 named Srimat Saradamani Devi, and stayed in the native place for a few days and then returned to Dakshineshwar. He was at that time age 23. After his return, he wanted to commune with the Divine Mother more deeply, and for this reason, he wanted an enclosed and solitary place. On the northern side of the big garden, there was a vast banyan tree covering a large plot of ground, which during these days remained almost empty and frequented by men, and was called the Panchavati. Ramakrishna wanted to have an enclosed place near it, where he could safely meditate without being disturbed. But he was very shy. He did not let anyone know about this, although he desired it very much. He was sitting one day at that time under the shade of the big banyan tree, facing the Ganga, which was then in its full tide, when he saw a bundle suddenly thrown over the bank by the rushing waves. There was a gardener working nearby, and he asked him to see what the bundle contained. When it was untied, to his astonishment, he found all the necessities for fencing an enclosure, such as bamboo, pieces of wood of equal length, big bundle of rope, and even a knife. He asked the gardener, who had a great regard for him, to enclose within a fence the plot he had already planted with tulasi, and the good man readily complied with his request. So every night, Ramakrishna used to go there to meditate and experience the transcendental conceptions of a yogi as described in the Tattva Upanishad.
Yeah, so remarkable incident recorded here of how Sri Ramakrishna's mere wish of something would be fulfilled by the Divine Mother. And in this case, the desire for an enclosure, and it just came by Mother Ganga, literally. By the Ganga, it came flowing down. Interestingly, that again, it says in that first sentence we read that space and time were completely overlooked, and he lost himself in her. Well, of course, time and space is in the Divine Mother. So when he was filled with the thoughts of the Divine Mother, he was literally losing himself in time and space itself, because she represents the manifestation of time and space. So this is very early in his life. He's just now getting married, and so we have a long life ahead of us. So let us continue.
Before a man realizes Brahman, he experiences these visions within himself: smoke, fog, wind, fire, firefly, lightning, crystal, lunar, and solar lights. Within a very short time, he realized the highest perfection of yoga by becoming one with Brahman, transcending all these visions, for nothing could be difficult for an ardent spirit like his. During this period, he first saw a vision of a most beautiful girl, whom he came to know as Sita, the devoted consort of Sri Ramachandra. The secret damsel came before him smiling, asked him what he wanted, for she was ready to give him whatever he desired. Sri Ramakrishna asked nothing but true devotion towards herself, who was the mother of the whole universe. At this, Sita was exceedingly pleased and merged into him. Referring to the miserable condition of his body in later days, the great sage used to tell us that because he had first seen Sita, whose whole life was almost a life of mystery, he also had to fare no better than she.
Yes, of course. We often say Sri Ramakrishna is the embodiment of all gods and goddesses. So here we see why, an incident anyway, where the goddess Sita literally merges into him. And of course, later on there'll be incidences where he's seen as Shiva, and he's seen as Jesus, and he's seen as Krishna, and he's seen as Mother Kali. So all of these different aspects are manifest within the person known as Ramakrishna. And of course, this first sentence is a quote from a scripture about the different visions that one experiences as they pursue spiritual life. And then, of course, he went on to have much deeper visions than those. Those are just like little signposts or flashing lights to tell you that you're on the road. All right, let's continue.
After this, Ramakrishna had many visions of gods and goddesses, all of whom used to lose themselves in him. His daily worship of Kali used to be conducted with more fervor and devotion during these days. He was more impatient to talk with her, to see her take food from his own hand. He wanted to put life into the stone image of the goddess and make her move and talk and play with him as a living mother. For he thought, was she not the all-powerful creator of the universe? Why then should she not grant him this favor? Was it too much for her, who could create and destroy all in one moment? Had she not previously revealed herself to her fortunate devotees, such as Ramprasad and others? Well, why, in his case, should she remain silent? Was there any defect in his devotion towards her? Why did she not point it out to him then? Thus he used to question her, while streams of tears would flow from his eyes. Not being able to bear separation from her, he would sometimes beat his head against the ground and rub his mouth upon it till blood would come from the wounded parts. In the madness of desperation, once he snatched the sword from her hand, wanted to kill himself with it. And then the charming figure of the Divine Mother appeared before him and sweetly consoled him, saying, "My dear child, I will come to thee whenever thou wilt call me." And at this, the terrible storm within Ramakrishna ceased.
So one of the most famous incidences in his sadhana, and of course it's the incredible depth of his devotion that caused the Divine Mother to reveal herself to him and to continue to do that throughout his life. She was his constant companion, and whenever he needed answers, he would simply go to her and ask her what to do, and she would communicate with him. So such was the depth of their connection. And so it was a unique incident in his life, and something that we've seen in a couple of other cases throughout history, but very rare indeed that someone has that much connection with the goddess. But some of the direct disciples also had the ability to communicate, usually with him, with Sri Ramakrishna. So someone like Swami Brahmananda would be able to, if he ever had someone come to him with some problem or some question that he couldn't quite come up with the answer, he would say, "Wait till tomorrow and come back and I'll give you the answer." And that was his way of giving himself some time to go into deep meditation and communicate with Sri Ramakrishna, who would then give him the answers. All right, so we'll continue about this intense zeal.
When Ramakrishna's zeal to see his mother made him so mad, not being able to understand the profundity of the devotion, the temple people used to tell all sorts of stories against him to the Rani. And Mathura and Nath, both of whom had fortunately more sense to appreciate him.
Now, of course, Rani's the one who built the temple. That's Rani Rashmani, and Mathur Babu was the her relative that managed the property for her. All right, go on.
So the objectors could not injure Ramakrishna anyway. But he used to be so much out of himself that it was found altogether impossible for him to carry on the temple worship systematically. In going to worship the mother, sometimes, why, he would place the flowers upon his own head. And not knowing himself to be in any way separate from her, why, sometimes realizing her to be permeating all living organisms, why, he would feed cats and crows with the offering intended for the goddess. These were indeed acts of extreme sacrilegiousness in the eyes of superficial observers. So Mathur employed Haladari, his cousin, as the priest, and allowed Sri Ramakrishna to do whatever he liked. When he was thus free, Sri Ramakrishna's devotion towards the goddess mother increased 1,000-fold. For days and nights he used to stay beyond the plane of his senses, and his loving nephew Hridoy tried his best to make him eat a few mouthfuls of food every day. Some days he could not succeed in making him swallow even a single mouth. So fully unconscious he used to be of his environment. Before his realization of the divine glory, his restlessness was such as cannot be described. his brain used to burn with a peculiar kind of unbearable heat. To cool down, he used to apply the cold mud of the Ganga to his head for hours.
Yeah, when you picture yourself in a scene like that, we can all wonder, would we have the sense to recognize his great spiritual being, or would we ourselves think he might be completely crazy? Since we would probably be judging him against ordinary priests who did ordinary things in the temple and did their ordinary duties in ordinary ways. And so here was this person doing all sorts of things which would seem very, very crazy to us. But it also brings about an idea for our own practice, in that if you are in the habit, say, of if you have a cat or a dog, or if you like to feed the birds outside, we should also think that we are making offerings to the Divine Mother in the form of the cats and the dogs and the birds. Why not? It's a nice spiritual practice to remember that she pervades all living things. And so we can continue to think that way. And of course, you can do that with people as well. And that's the whole motto of the Ramakrishna order. You're serving jivas as Shiva. So every time you do something for someone else, which would include serving a meal, then you can think that you're serving Shiva in the form of that particular jiva. So, all right, so now we're going to continue with what's happening with his second brother.
The second brother, Rameshwar, was living at home to look after the domestic affairs. So Ramakrishna was left without a guardian except his faithful nephew and attendant Hridoy, who loved him with intense devotion, who followed him everywhere like a shadow, and but for whom the preservation of his body would have been impossible. This we've heard from his own mouth. So can we too be too grateful to Hridoy, who served him with unstinted devotion for 30 years? That Sri Ramakrishna always required a man to look after and watch him can be easily gathered from the facts already stated. He was almost wholly careless of his body and unconscious of his environment. Why, frequently he used to fall into trances when he would be totally unconscious, even of his body. And Hridoy used to look after him always.
And of course, if you've read the Gospel of Ramakrishna, you also know that Hridoy was somewhat of a character, and he could also be somewhat of a difficult person that would do things that annoyed some of the devotees and sometimes annoyed Sri Ramakrishna himself. But it's like writing a drama. If everything just goes smoothly, it's a rather dull play. You have to have some spice in the drama in order to make it very interesting. And so Hridoy served that purpose, where he was both a very loyal attendant, but he was also a little bit of a character that would cause scenes, you could say, occasionally. All right, so continuing.
At this time, he was attacked with dyspepsia, and therefore went to his native place for a change, accompanied by his devoted nephew. His former playmates lost in him the old jolly friend, and most of them took him to be mad, as he became very much reserved and loved to frequent the cremation ground. But soon he got cured of his dyspepsia and came back to Dakshineshwar. He now wanted to try the means prescribed in the Tantras through proper forms for the attainment of the favor already received from this Divine Mother. A middle-aged Brahmin lady, well-versed in all Puranas and Tantras, came at this time to the place, and seeing Sri Ramakrishna, at once understood his exalted spiritual state and said that she had at last found out the man for whom she had been searching for a long while. She had learned from some supernatural source that 3 great souls would make their appearance in Bengal at that time. She had found out the 2 she had been destined to serve, and the 3rd she had now got in Sri Ramakrishna.
I can't think of a reference where the first 2 are detailed as to who those were. That would be an interesting sideline to find out who the other 2 were. But of course, this is the Bhairavi Brahmanian who was his spiritual teacher in this particular line of spiritual discipline. The various 64 tantric disciplines which are prescribed to have the aspirant try to see beyond the pairs of dualities, beyond the good and evil, and to really get complete control over their senses. And again, you see how he just had a desire, and the desire is fulfilled. Had a desire to learn this, and the teacher came. And of course, this is told to us too, that those who have a sincere desire for a spiritual teacher, they'll run into the spiritual teacher. And so these things happen to us as well, but we may not be as aware of them as Sri Ramakrishna was. All right, so we'll continue with this part of his story.
Ramakrishna, too, was very happy in getting her opportune help, for she not only dispersed the anxiety created in his mind by people who took him to be mad, but helped him considerably in his intended project to try Tantrika means for the realization of his goal. He went through many difficult processes very successfully through the help of this wonderful lady, and by the time he was perfect master of the Tantras, she disappeared.
Yes, he again was an extremely quick student, and so as soon as he mastered all of the different processes, then she knew that her task was done, and she was, like many spiritual teachers and leaders of that time, she was not going to just sit in one place. She was going to go on, and perhaps she had other people to see or things to do, and she was not going to get attached to any particular place. So she simply left Sri Ramakrishna's life. She wasn't going to be just hanging around to see what was happening or to gloat over him. But she was also instrumental, as it hints here, that of letting people know that he really was fulfilling all the signs of an avatar, and that these weren't signs of madness, but these were signs of a divine person. All right, so we'll continue here.
It's a curious thing to note. Whenever Ramakrishna wanted to try any of the several paths leading to truth, he always used to get an expert guide whose unexpected and well-timed arrival made all things very easy for him, and no path, however difficult, would take more than 3 days for him to travel through. When he was trying the Tantra paths, many eminent followers of Tantra used to come to him of their own accord. During this period, he was once attacked with an insatiable hunger, and the wonderful Brahmana lady cured him of it by always keeping before him large quantities of various kinds of food, the constant sight of which gradually cured him of his unnatural appetite. One time his body seemed to him to be merged in divine glory, And such was the beauty of his person then, that people used to regard him with wonder.
Yeah, he would have a kind of a spiritual glow. You know, Chaitanya is often called the Golden One, or Gauranga, and Sri Ramakrishna had that kind of image to people as well, especially at certain times. So it was wonderful that this lady had the ability to recognize certain spiritual problems and how to solve them. This is just one example here, but she helped him over several obstacles. And so it takes an adept teacher like that to help someone that's as advanced as Sri Ramakrishna was. All right, let's see what happens when he finished this.
When he finished the Tantrika path, another wave rose in his mind, which made him restless for realizing Sri Ramachandra and enjoying his divine beauty. Sannyasi, who was a devoted worshiper of Sri Rama, came at the time and set him on that path. Sri Ramakrishna realized this ideal by seeing the object of his intense devotion. The sannyasin used to worship an image of baby Rama that he had with him. He presented this to his glorious disciple, who saw in it the living God and daily adored and worshipped it with so much fervor that he could never part with it, carrying it always with him whenever he went. He used to regard it as his darling and himself as Kaushalya. And such was the intensity of his feeling that he was always living and moving in company with his beloved.
This, of course, is the ideal of bhakti yoga, to develop such intense devotion towards your particular chosen ideal that you carry an image of that chosen ideal with you and treat it as a living being. And of course, that's the attitude we have here in our temple as well. And Sri Ramakrishna, of course, is seen as the symbol for all the different gods and goddesses, but we also have separate images for some of the separate deities as well. And so the Lord gets up in the morning and is offered incense and light, and offered a meal during the noon hour, and then offered all of our actions during the arati. And then, of course, he's tucked in with blankets like he was going to sleep, and in the evening. So we have that same kind of thing, and this is a typical kind of practice for households in India, where they have a shrine and they keep up daily practices of the deity, so that they also greet the deity when they get up in the morning, say goodbye to the deity when they leave for work, greet the deity when they come home from work, offer the food and offer incense and offer a candle, offer flowers, and so forth, just as you would for an honored guest. So this is the secret to the devotional path. All right.
Then Ramakrishna became restless for Sri Krishna. Sometimes, like Yashoda, he would anxiously wait for his darling with butter in his hand. Sometimes he would look towards him as his beloved companion and friend, like the shepherd boys of Gokula, and would be restless for his company. Sometimes he would anxiously wait for the much longed for union with the beautiful swain of Vrindavan, the abode of all charm, all beauty, and all perfection, till in the intensity of his fervor and devotion, he at last brought the infinite Lord of the universe before him in the most charming person of sweet Sri Krishna. This incident reminds us of his beautiful saying, wherein he says, that as formless water can be frozen and thus given a shape by the application of intense cold, similarly the formless and infinite God of the universe can be condensed and given a shape through the intense devotion of a true lover. During this period of his life, many Vaishnava saints used to come to him to help him on and would be helped instead.
So again, another example of his going through all of these different spiritual moods. One first for the Divine Mother, then through tantric disciplines, then Sri Rama, and then Sri Krishna. And of course, each of these can be viewed as embodiments of the entire universe. They are each concrete images, but they are images that embody an infinite principle. So the infinite principle is still there, even though it's a finite image. And so, of course, in Sri Ramakrishna's later teaching days, this became one of the hallmarks of his teachings, that the formless God is both formless and God is with form, and God is both masculine and God is feminine. It's with aspects and without aspects. It's all of these, and your various sadhanas can allow you to realize this. Now, the only strangeness here is that we don't usually think of devotion as being intensely cold. We usually think of love as being warm. So, but other than that, this analogy is very good, that the application of intense cold, and we have to think of that as devotional somehow, but and then the formless water gets frozen into a shape. So, and again, interesting, you see, as soon as he started to practice a particular discipline, then other people that were on a similar path would be attracted to him. So like, rather than opposites being attractive, we have examples of likes being attracted. So if someone is a devotee of Sri Krishna and they sense that there is a great devotee of Krishna in the form of Sri Ramakrishna, then they would get attracted and they would find their way somehow to Dakshineshwar and visit him. And again, it says that the help was usually perhaps mutual, and perhaps the visitor would receive more help than Sri Ramakrishna received from them. So wonderful examples of his sadhana. This is really a wonderful summary of Sri Ramakrishna's life that emphasizes some things that we don't always hear. All right, let's go on.
Once Mathuranath was insisting upon God's inability to violate or withstand the natural laws before him, to which Sri Ramakrishna objected and said that being all-powerful, God could do whatever he liked. But Mathura was not convinced, but rather argued that God could never produce two kinds of flowers in a single plant. For some business, Sri Ramakrishna went out for a while. Coming back, he asked Mathura to follow him, who doing so was brought before a flower plant on one branch, of which there were two flowers of different sorts. Mathura was then convinced. This and many other wonderful incidents in connection with Sri Ramakrishna made Mathura his ardent devotee and follower. For his comforts, he never hesitated to spend any amount of money. He regarded Sri Ramakrishna as his God. Rani Rasamani's devotion towards him was also very intense. She examined him in several ways and was thoroughly convinced of his divine nature.
Now, of course, now we have other ways of explaining, say, two different colors of flowers on the same plant. It's a genetic mutation. There's sometimes genes that are easily flipped from one form to another. And so, being a flower hybridizer myself, I can tell you that you do occasionally get flowers that are different on the same plant, and they're called mutations or sports. But that doesn't really take away from the miraculous nature of it. And we know that people like Luther Burbank, through their intense concentration and communion with plants, could induce such changes in the plants by simply talking to them and asking them to do certain things like losing their thorns or producing hybrids with some other plant that they're not normally used to hybridizing with. So and of course now we also understand about quantum mechanics, and that there's an uncertainty realm in quantum mechanics. And so we can see that through that uncertainty, if God wants to have something miraculous happen, all he has to do is fish out one of those extremely improbable events within the quantum realm and collapse the wave function in a completely unexpected way, one that might be 1 in a million chances of it happening. And of course you see this with people that get spontaneous healings too, through intense prayer and so forth. They achieve miraculous cures of diseases, diseases where doctors think are incurable, or that they're beyond the ability of current medicine to get the person well. And yet through intense prayer, people can achieve cures. And so here again we find that the divine can, as I say, pick out the improbable from all the possibilities of in the quantum realm when so requested sincerely by a devotee. All right, we have time for a couple more paragraphs. Let's go on.
After this, Sri Ramakrishna wanted to realize the goal of a monistic Vedanta. And a sannyasa named Totapuri, opportunity came at the time to help him. Sent, as it were, by some unseen power. Guided by him, he was able to realize in 3 days the highest samadhi, in which all idea of duality was lost. Totapuri was astonished to see him realize within so short a period the most exalted state of superconsciousness, which is altogether inaccessible to most men, and which took Totapuri 40 years to attain. He therefore could not help regarding him as an extraordinary being, and although he had come there to stay only for 3 days, as he was on his way to Gangasagar, he remained for 11 months with his disciple.
So again, of course, Sri Ramakrishna had already advanced to such a high spiritual state. It was just one small step for Sri Ramakrishna to achieve that highest superconscious state. It's not like he was starting at the beginning. He had already achieved union with God in all sorts of forms, in the form of Mother Kali, in the form of Rama, in the form of Krishna. So after having achieved that kind of union with God, achieving the union with God in the formless aspect of Nirvikalpa Samadhi is just one more step for him. It wasn't like he was starting at the beginning here. And so, of course, Totapuri probably didn't quite know exactly how advanced his student was when he started to give him instructions. And so to him it seemed quite miraculous that in 3 days he was able to exceed where most students that he had probably tried to teach, and he himself had taken many, many years to achieve. And so sometimes teachers are lucky to get students that are already fairly well advanced. It's sort of like someone teaching Mozart and finding out how easily they learn how to play various instruments. Sri Ramakrishna was a prodigy in spiritual attainment. All right, let's read another couple paragraphs.
During this period, Sri Ramakrishna used to live nearly always in that transcendental plane of superconsciousness, completely separating himself from his body, which on account of this appeared nothing better than a dead one, so much so that even birds used to come and sit upon it to pick up the grains of rice from the head where they had been put in while offering worship to the highest self. His hair became matted. He was irregular in his bath and forgetful of his environments the greater portion of the time.
So again, this is an exemplary of an extremely high spiritual state where one simply forgets their body. They're in such a high spiritual state that they're not identified with the body. And of course, this is what you'd expect when you've experienced nirvikalpa samadhi. In nirvikalpa samadhi, you've completely merged with the highest reality, and you are no longer identified with your body. And so he would simply continue to slip into that kind of consciousness where he was separated from his body. Now, only a great spiritual soul like Sri Ramakrishna can endure that kind of thing safely. Most people, if they stay out of their body too long, are simply not going to come back in. But Sri Ramakrishna, of course, had a mission, and so the Divine Mother wasn't going to let him separate permanently from his body. So looking after him, she managed to always have somebody there, like Mathur or Hridoy, that was going to be looking after him and making sure that he would be able to continue with his mission. But we're still not quite there yet. We still haven't reached the point of his life where many of his young disciples have started to come. All right, so we have a long paragraph, and that should probably do it for the night. Let's just read this one more.
Thus Ramakrishna's frequent trances began to increase in their duration, so that at last he could not come down to the plane of his five senses. Hridoy was unable to succeed, making him eat anything for days and days together. And everyone was naturally anxious for his life. Most people just gave him up for lost. Another sannyasin made his appearance at that crisis, and he at once found him out to be in the highest samadhi. And being a yogi himself, he knew how to bring him down. The treatment which he thought would cure him was of a very rude character, for it consisted in dealing heavy blows upon his person by means of a short and thick club. The sannyasin, without any delay, proceeded to his business and began to strike him heavily with the club, and excessive physical pain thus created brought Ramakrishna down to semi-consciousness for a while. And when a little food used to be forced into his mouth, sometimes no amount of beating would bring him back to consciousness. In this way it went on for some months. And the sannyasin, too, was almost becoming hopeless when, to relieve his anxiety, and that of all his friends as well as for the good fortune of posterity, his body was spared, as it were, by an attack of a very acute kind of his old dyspepsia, which brought down the mind to his body.
So you can see that being in a highest samadhi for a long time also has some of its drawbacks. That you might end up with somebody that comes and beats you up with a club. So, but this is talk about beating the sense into somebody. He was beyond his senses, and they had to beat some sense consciousness back into him because he had just detached himself from the idea of senses in the body. And so it was interesting that even eventually the strikes of the club didn't help. It had to be a physical disease that allowed him to suffer enough. So most of us don't have that problem. We get chronic pains and things even though we don't need to be brought down from nirvikalpa samadhi. But so we still have to put up with it. All right, well, we can be reminded that Sri Ramakrishna's state, when we have various illnesses, perhaps we can simply remind ourselves of Sri Ramakrishna's state and how his mind was brought back down. Perhaps that will help us remember what state he was in that he had to be brought down from. All right, we'll close with a chant and we'll meet again next week. We still have a few more pages in this section. I think we might be able to finish it next time. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.